A night of mayhem in Miami has been followed by a day of more tension and more trouble. There were new reports of arson, looting, and another death. The full story from Ed Rabel.
A dusk to dawn curfew has been imposed on northwest Miami following a day and night of killing, looting, and burning that left at least 10 persons dead and 120 injured. The violence broke out after a white male jury in Tampa found 4 white former Dade County policemen innocent in the death of black Miami businessman Arthur McDuffie.
Not guilty. So say we all. David H. Fisher, foreman.
Alex Marrero, Michael Watts, Ira Diggs, and Herbert Evans had been charged with beating McDuffie to death and making his death look like an accident. McDuffie's mother was present for the verdict. In Miami, a crowd demonstrating against the verdict gathered in front of the Dade County Justice Building.
Somehow, in this town, black people must be able to deal with this in an orderly fashion.
Oh, no. Oh,
no. The reaction became violent. A police spokesman said one of those who died was a young black man shot dead by county policemen after a security guard was threatened. The spokesman said it was not exactly clear how the other victims died. They included 3 white males, 1 Oriental man, 4 black men, and a police officer who suffered an apparent heart attack during the rioting. The fires and overturned cars created scenes reminiscent of a war zone.
I think this is a little bit more emotional than the one in New Jersey. This hits close to the heart, this killing, this McDuffie killing, and that innocent verdict up there in Tampa. It don't set well with these people. It don't set well with me.
Many of the victims were taken to Jackson Memorial Hospital. Police said one victim was shot, had his ear cut off, tongue severed, and a red rose stuffed into his mouth.
We're loaded to capacity. We can't handle anymore.
What type of injuries are you seeing here tonight?
We've seen everything. We've seen all sorts of major trauma, from gunshot wounds, stab wounds, people beaten up, every parts of the body, from the head, abdomen, chest, you name it, it's happened.
National Guardsmen and other law enforcement agents swept into the riot-scarred area early this morning to help local police try to restore order. Firemen were prevented from fighting fires because of snipers. An emergency meeting of Miami's Community Relations Board tried to pinpoint exactly how the violence began.
I think something dramatic needs to happen in this community. In this meeting, I think some of us from this meeting need to be able to go back to the community and say these are the compromises, if you want to call them compromises.
Meanwhile, as the looting and burning continued late today, the U.S. Justice Department said it would seek civil rights indictments against the 4 ex-policemen whose acquittal triggered the violence. Officials said they hoped their action would diffuse the unrest, but no one was willing to predict when the rioting will end. Ed Rabel,
scene of racial violence after an all-white jury in Tampa acquitted 4 ex-policemen in the death of a black businessman. Authorities today put the death toll officially at 15. Police regained control of the streets today, but among the culprits they sought were other police. Eric Ingberg reports.
Some fires were still burning this morning in the northwest Miami neighborhood where the violence was centered. But there were only scattered reports of sniping and looting, and police say a stiff curfew, coupled with the emotional and physical exhaustion this city has endured for 3 days, were restoring order.
Last night things were pretty quiet, so we feel we've turned the corner and that we're well on our way to stabilizing the area and bringing it back to normal.
Barricades were removed from streets surrounding the riot zone and traffic allowed to move again. The curfew has been liberalized so that citizens will be allowed on the streets until 10 tonight, but schools will remain closed at least until Thursday. In downtown Miami, merchants who had shuttered their stores out of fear the violence would spread reopened for business. Residents of one neighborhood said that during the peak of the rioting Sunday night, they watched in amazement as a group of city policemen vandalized more than a dozen automobiles in a parking lot, smashing windows with billy clubs and rifles, then spray painting the cars. Officials say their initial investigation tends to confirm the charges and that they will try to identify and punish the officers involved. Cleanup crews venturing into the area for the first time found entire blocks destroyed. Damage estimates begin at $100 million. Hundreds of persons were injured, nearly 1,000 arrested. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Miami.
When the magnitude of Miami's rioting became apparent, President Carter quickly sent Attorney General Civiletti to Florida to try to resolve the civil rights problems underlying the violence. Fred Graham reports.
After a day of meetings in riot-torn Miami, Civiletti concluded that a basic reason for the city's racial turmoil is a widespread feeling among blacks that they are not treated fairly by the police or the courts.
There is a deep and frustrating belief and feeling of a double standard of justice and unequal justice applying to a substantial segment of this community.
He announced a beefed-up force of FBI agents, federal attorneys, and U.S. Marshals to look into past and future charges of police brutality against blacks. Civiletti also instituted a unique Justice Department watchdog system over police brutality cases handled by the Office of State's Attorney Janet Reno.
That's that you're playing games, okay?
Blacks have complained repeatedly that her office has not cracked down on police brutality, culminating in the acquittal of 4 policemen last weekend that touched off the rioting. Black leaders have also called for Ms. Reno's resignation, and she has refused, prompting suggestions that the system of justice in general, and specifically Ms. Reno, are becoming the scapegoat for the rioting here.
Black leaders are calling for my resignation. I think that's being done from a sense of frustration. If you characterize that as my being made a scapegoat, then yes, if people can go out and riot and pillage and loot and kill to force an elected official from office, that destroys our entire elective system.
Civiletti said the Justice Department's investigation will begin with a grand jury that will be convened here tomorrow. Fred Graham, CBS News, Miami.
Chunk of the country. The death toll in Miami now stands at 16, but apparently there were no deaths overnight as a curfew took hold at 8 p.m. and as Florida Governor Bob Graham again went on television with another broadcast appeal. Steve Croft picks up the story at that point.
We desperately need a night of brotherhood before we can begin to build a future of peace in Miami.
Florida Governor Bob Graham went on statewide television last night pleading for reason and tranquility. Police and National Guardsmen once again imposed a curfew over much of northwest Miami.
As of 8 o'clock, we have a curfew.
At dusk, there were signs on the street that the violence that transformed much of Liberty City into rubble and left 16 people dead might be over.
All the white people, please, is burnt down. So we don't need them National Guard. You see what I'm saying? So what they should do is just pull them crackers on out. We don't need no curfew. Ain't nothing else around here for us to burn now.
But there were things left to burn, and for the third straight night, arsonists torched buildings and set Miami's skies ablaze. Snipers kept the firemen away. Authorities tried to be optimistic. The level of violence was down, they said. No one had died since Monday afternoon. Miami's fragmented black community met and selected former Miami Commissioner Athalie Range as their spokesman. She's trying to convince blacks that the violence is counterproductive. In hopes of slowing the destruction, already estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars, Miami's government and civic leaders have adopted a conciliatory tone.
What we have here is a problem that no one person or no one organization or no one government can assume full responsibility for the failure. We're all responsible. And the solution for this problem is in us all.
Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti was in town, and tomorrow a federal grand jury will begin probing the death of black businessman Arthur McDuffie at the hands of 4 local white police officers. It was their acquittal in state court that touched off the violence on Saturday. NAACP President Benjamin Hooks is here. Jesse Jackson prayed with riot victims, and Andrew Young toured black neighborhoods, worrying that violence might spread to other U.S. cities.
Violence has a way, like nonviolence, of being contagious, and I am worried about it.
Young says there is little that black leaders can do to stop violence once it's erupted, that they can only translate the rage into some kind of positive change. That process is now underway. The hope is it will gain momentum as the rioters run out of steam. Steve Croft, CBS News, Miami. Before the current troubles broke out.
Police were on the streets in force in Miami today after 4 of their number were wounded by sniper fire last night, a night too remindful of last May's rioting. A nervous quiet prevailed in the Liberty City area. Bruce Hall reports.
They're killing people here.
Terrified whites fled as gangs of youth pelted cars with rocks and bottles in the predominantly black Liberty City section of Miami. More than 24 people were injured before squads of riot-equipped police armed with tear gas guns marched in. Officials hoped the high police visibility would stop the violence in this area that was devastated by riots only 2 months ago. However, at a large housing project, police fired round after round of tear gas to disperse gangs of youth. Firemen were also hampered by sporadic gunfire as they attempted to put out several blazes in the area. The police blamed the high incidence of snipers on the large number of weapons stolen during the May riots. Officers on the street said at times it appeared everyone had a gun. But only 11 people were arrested, most for refusing to obey police orders. The area was quiet today as police continued to patrol Liberty City, but few whites returned, and residents in the black housing projects said tension remains very high. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Miami.
5 minutes past the hour.
When the sun rose over the Liberty City area of Miami 1 year ago this morning, it was on a scene of devastation. Rioting had broken out on the streets of the largely black neighborhood the night before, and the rioting would continue for several days to come. When it was finally over, 18 people had been killed on the streets of Liberty City. This morning, 1 year later, Sam Ford tells us how it looks now on just one of those streets.
22nd Avenue runs through the heart of Liberty City. It is a thoroughfare which saw much of the worst of last year's racial violence. At 22nd Avenue's Caleb Center, a new musical written and produced by a black Miamian just opened for a 3-week run.
Nothing but the power. Nothing, no, no. Nothing, no, no. Nothing, no, no. Nothing but the power.
It's about the 1831 rebellion of slaves led by Nat Turner, and it has special significance to many people here.
We will hit hard, strike terror, and devastation everywhere we go.
Much like the blacks of Nat Turner's day, many blacks here felt that last year's violence was a justified rebellion against an unfair system. The violence along 22nd Avenue broke out after an all-white jury acquitted 4 white policemen in the beating death of black insurance man Arthur McDuffie.
Every time, like, say the whites get into something, right? Slap them on the hand and bam, that's it, right? Blacks get into it, you get 15, 20 years, something like that, you know.
And so the riot was to do what?
Let them know, man, that you can't stand for it all the time. It's times where somebody's gonna stand up. Somebody's gonna stand up.
But that standing up has been costly for this community. A recent survey by the Miami Herald newspaper found that of the more than 50 businesses destroyed by the riots, fewer than 10 have been rebuilt. The others have closed or moved, taking with them, by some estimations, as many as 3,000 jobs. And last month, a report released by the Dade County manager concluded that white Dade County, by and large, seems not to care what happens to Liberty City.
It seems as if on the other side of the tracks, there's wealth. On this side of the tracks, there's nothing.
Annie Love is president of the Tenants Association of the huge Scott Carver public housing project, which sits on both sides of 22nd Avenue. She and others complain of the growing isolation here and of some $50 million federal dollars Jimmy Carter promised Liberty City that Ronald Reagan is taking away.
I don't think the president has actually sit down, in my opinion, and viewed what the budget and the cuts with the social service program going to do to people.
I am a city employee, and I got the June the 12th, we'll be out of a job here. And a lot of people, they said 7,000 people will be out of work. And that's all they're going to do is start another rebellion here, because people going to have to feed themselves and their family.
According to figures released by Dade County, the unemployment rate here is already 33% for black adults and even higher for youths. That compares with a county-wide rate of only 6%. Many unemployed youth spend a lot of time playing bid whist. Many also play a game they call smash and grab.
Where the robbery occurred? What street?
When white motorists stop at a traffic light on 22nd Avenue, the youths smash the window of a locked door and grab anything of value inside.
On 27th Avenue?
I was heading north on 27th Avenue when
Robberies here are not an everyday occurrence, but an every hour occurrence. And in the vast majority of the cases, the victims, as well as the criminals, are poor and black.
This house here was break in 3 times since Christmas. My car and stuff was break in. I mean, how could it get better? And you can't even go to work in peace, but you're coming back and find all your stuff gone.
Since the riot, most of the young people carry guns now. So that make you have to carry a gun. So you have to mostly walk the streets with a gun. You get your jewelry snatched, you get robbed if you don't protect your own self.
Inspection. The police have had perhaps the most difficult job the past year, trying to lower the record-high crime rate while working to boost their image tainted by the McDuffie killing. Officer Jim Ash has had some success in doing both. At the Scott Carver Project, he is part of the volunteer team which covers the project on foot. During a recent 3-month period, crime here declined 51%. And yesterday, he was among those officers who peacefully escorted a demonstration down 22nd Avenue, marking the first anniversary of the riots. Last year, police ducked rocks and sniper fire. Ash's fear is that they may have to again.
The relationship with the police have improved somewhat, but the job situation hasn't improved. The housing conditions haven't improved. The recreation facilities haven't improved. And this is coming from the community. That hasn't improved. And right now, the area is very vulnerable. And all it'll take is a spark.
Now 19 minutes before the hour.
Demonstrators marched 6 miles today from their neighborhood to Miami City Hall in protest of the shooting death of a young black man by a policeman a month ago. Renee Ferguson has that story.
This time, the demonstration was peaceful, and yet there were signs of the anger still simmering beneath the surface as 200 residents of Miami's all-black Overtown community marched with other community activists from their neighborhood to City Hall.
It's a beginning. It's something. We're doing something.
Inside City Hall, community residents made it clear as they met with the mayor and city commissioners that they wanted the prosecution of Miami police officer Luis Alvarez for the shooting death in December of 20-year-old Neville Johnson.
I told you to your face what the police department were doing. You have never watched it. We want justice and we want it now. We want answers. We don't want to be put off and put off and put off. Mr. Mayor, don't let us down. Don't let us down, please. How many more of our blacks must die?
Okay. In the event that some of us are not satisfied with the verdict, there's not a damn thing left to burn in Overtown. There's nothing else to steal Overtown.
Overtown residents returned to their community with promises from city officials of improved police-community relations. Promises that the man accused of killing Neville Johnson will be treated fairly. In 2 weeks, they were told, the official investigation into the shooting will be complete. Until then, community leaders are attempting simply to keep the peace. Renee Ferguson, CBS News, Miami.
There was a cable car tragedy.
The violence in Miami. A black neighborhood is quiet this morning, but still cordoned off. Police are on alert, and schools will be closed in the area today. But on the day that Miami and all of America were remembering a nonviolent martyr, Martin Luther King, and within a week of the Super Bowl scheduled for that city, a 5-hour disturbance erupted with gunfire, arson, lootings, beatings, and rock throwing. Juan Vasquez reports on the trouble and how it started.
Please do not
Police said the disturbance began when a young man on a motorcycle was killed following a police chase for a traffic violation. Miami Mayor Xavier Suarez, who was one of the first to arrive, tried to calm things down, but he had to leave under police escort, and the situation quickly worsened. Paramedics and police had to protect themselves from a shower of rocks and bottles when they removed the victim's body.
We're still getting nailed.
City officials called out every available police officer in an effort to prevent a full-scale riot. They cordoned off a 40-block area in the predominantly black Overtown section of Miami to keep the disorders from spreading. At least 2 television news cars were set on fire by angry crowds, and a CBS News crew was roughed up as they took pictures of a building that was set on fire. Police cars were also pelted with stones and bottles.
It's a crisis. We're dealing with it, and hopefully it'll be behind us soon.
Shortly after midnight, city officials claimed they had the situation under control, even though sporadic looting and rock throwing continued for hours. With the city full of visitors for the upcoming Super Bowl, officials were especially anxious to prevent further disturbance.
In Miami tonight, unfortunately, new trouble appears to be brewing. There has been renewed violence as police closed off parts of the Liberty City and Overtown areas in Miami following new reports of gunfire, beatings, and car burnings. All of that followed a night of arson and looting after the police killing of a black motorcyclist during a chase last night. Late today, a passenger on the motorcycle died of injuries suffered when it crashed. Correspondent Juan Vasquez reports on the Martin Luther King Day outbreak that marked the Super Bowl city's 4th episode of rioting in this decade.
Cleanup crews moved in quickly at daybreak to pick up and sweep away the debris of a night of violence in Overtown. Late today, the FBI announced that it would open a civil rights investigation into the shooting of a black motorcyclist by a white policeman. Super Bowl week was supposed to be Miami's moment to shine, but for a few hours last night, it was anything but a super city.
You know, timing for a tragedy of this sort is always bad.
The deep-seated anger was evident on the street. Mayor Suarez was pelted with rocks and bottles when he tried to quiet down the crowd. Among the unanswered questions are why police fired at the motorcyclist for an alleged traffic violation and whether he was shot deliberately.
I'm mad. I want to know who did it and why they did it.
The first officers on the scene were attacked. Before they regained the upper hand, several were hit and at least one patrol car was stoned. Other cars were set on fire. A CBS News crew was assaulted and arsonists torched a warehouse next to a junkyard.
The nation, the country needs to know that Miami still has unresolved problems with this black community, and those problems are likely to erupt during Super Bowl week or not.
Local officials saw the Super Bowl as a perfect opportunity to show that Miami has more to offer than drugs, refugees, and riots. Instead, the spotlight has shifted to the city's problems. More Central American refugees arrived in Miami today, and even though the city doesn't know what to do with the latest immigrant wave, some blacks see them as a threat.
A lot of black folk just shook their head and said that here we go again. Merelitos before, and now here come the Nicaraguans.
Local officials downplayed the similarities with the Miami riots of 1980 and 1982, saying the latest violence involved much smaller crowds. Despite official expressions of optimism that the worst was over, there was sporadic violence late today, with police bracing for more disorders tonight.
As darkness came, there were more reports of violence, and both the city and the county have called in the entire police force to deal with the expected violence.
Juan Vasquez in Miami. We emphasize that what Juan described as happening in Miami is happening in certain sections. It is not happening all over the city, much less the area. In Washington, and hoping that hundreds of arrests may hold off the looting, arson, and rioting of the past 2 nights in some sections of the city. But activists warn decisive action is needed from investigators into the interracial killing they say sparked the trouble. Juan Vasquez reports.
The second night of violence left 7 people shot and more than a dozen stores and warehouses sacked. The shelves empty, the owners bitter.
See my store, mister. $250,000 I got in the store, mister, in 5 years.
Hamden's store was looted by people he recognized as his customers. This furniture warehouse was completely stripped. Jittery store owners had armed themselves to protect their businesses, the target of black frustration and resentment against outsiders.
It's wrong to burn a person's place out, but how can you get people to sit up and listen to you if they don't listen to you? You got to tell somebody, and this is the only way some blacks know how to do it.
This time, the trouble spread to Liberty City and other parts of Miami. The county and the city mobilized every available officer to deal with the emergency. Today, police began to arraign some 250 people arrested last night. And despite police objections, the city created an independent review panel to investigate Monday's shooting of a black motorcyclist by a white officer. Police treatment has been a major complaint in the black community, and the mayor said he wanted to go further.
Wholesale sociological, psychological testing of police officers to determine which ones are already inclined to be violent.
Even as Miami's troubles deepen, fans continue to arrive for Sunday's Super Bowl. The trouble has been confined to relatively small sections of the city, far from hotels and the stadium. But players from Miami have been asked repeatedly about the action on the streets instead of the action on the field.
You know, I've been trying to explain to some of the other players that this kind of thing don't go on every day, and it's too bad that it happened this week because a lot of people are going to get the wrong idea.
The police have not released anyone arrested in last night's disturbances. They hope that by keeping them in jail for one more day, they'll discourage more trouble tonight. Juan Vasquez, CBS News, Miami.